And so today we're going to be we're joined by Gemma Beckley and Colin Beckley from the Meditation Trust in the UK. And the Meditation Trust are an organization. They're a registered charity in the UK, and they've been teaching TM for many, many years. And they've come along today to give us an introductory description of what they do, the work that they do. And TM is available throughout the world. And if you need further information on other TM organizations in your country, we'll make some of that available to you. So just let me know in the chat. Gemma and Colin, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Sarah. So thanks for that great introduction. Our presentation will be, we'll see how it goes. We haven't we're aiming for it to be around 45 minutes to leave the remaining time for Q&A. We want to leave plenty of time for everybody to ask questions. So you're due to finish at, so that it's an hour and a half in total, that we've got here? That's right. Yeah, and so we'll aim to split half and half between us talking and Q&A. So we'll try not to waffle on for too long and then pass over to questions. Okay, so so thanks for those introductions. I'll start off and say a little bit. I'll pass over to Colin in a moment so he's got a few diagrams to show you, to explain a few points, then it'll come back to me and then we'll go to the Q&A. So as the title said, we're talking about transcendence today. Transcendence is a state of consciousness. We'll be talking about how what we teach allows us to experience that and the impact of that and how that relates to addiction and recovery. And you'll see in the title I put self-recovery, reconnecting the self with a capital S, not the individual small self that we understand as our personality and our day-to-day doings, our being, if you like. So we'll come to all of that. We'll talk about some different theories. I'll touch on some different theories of addiction, but then go on to talk about the Vedic worldview of addiction, what the Vedic tradition has to say about how addiction comes about. I'll pass on to Colin to talk about, in a diagram form, this concept of how action, impression and desire are part of a process which keeps addiction going. He'll come back to me and I'll talk a bit about stress and trauma and how that's held in the body and the problem that's going on in the body. And then I'll talk about how transcendence helps to heal this process, helps to heal the stress in the nervous system, and how we go about transcendence. How do we experience transcendence? What do we do to experience that state? I'll touch on also different types of meditation and how they relate to each other, because that's always useful to have a understanding of an overview of how different techniques differ and how they work. So we'll touch on that as well. So, I have a background. You may be aware, if you've looked us up beforehand, I have a background in clinical psychology. My first career, I trained as a clinical psychologist. And so with that in mind, I'm very aware of a lot of the different theories that we have for different diagnoses and disorders and difficulties. So when it comes to addiction, there's a few different theories that I'm sure you're all aware of. Many theories have tried to account for why people use alcohol and why they continue to relapse despite the negative consequences of the alcohol. And these include things like biological factors. They talk about genetics, tolerance, physical dependency. They talk about psychological factors such as personality traits and anxiety and trauma. They talk about psychodynamic processes. You may have come across that, where people talk about early childhood experience and conflicts and how that affects your current patterns of relating and your behaviours in adult life. There's all sorts of talk about cognitions and behaviours, how our thoughts affect how we behave, our conditioning as we've grown up, our social learning, all this kind of stuff. our social environment, structures, processes, our culture, all this stuff, and also, of course, self-medication for mental distress. Now, when we're feeling upset, we seek something to help with our mental distress. So these theories have all been shown to contribute to the persistence of substance abuse and alcohol use and relapse of alcohol use as well. And it's generally understood that it's a complex process, that many of these factors are simultaneously involved. There's not just one single contributor to the issue. However, what I wanted to explain to you today is an approach or a viewpoint which you may not have come across. Some of you may not have come across a Vedic understanding, a Vedic worldview. If you've not heard of the term Vedic, Vedic knowledge is a body of knowledge from the Vedic tradition. The Vedic tradition goes back over 10,000 years, and the knowledge that's been passed down through the Vedic tradition was cognized by rishis in higher states of consciousness, who have cognized this knowledge and passed it down through a tradition, an oral tradition, from teacher to teacher, and this is the tradition to which we're referring. According to the Vedic viewpoint, that underlying any addiction is a concept based on what they call pragyaprad. Pragyaprad, some of these words are, you won't recognize some of these words, they are Sanskrit words. Sanskrit is the ancient language of the Veda. The word pragyaprad means a mistake of the intellect. And according to the Vedic viewpoints, the underlying addiction, any underlying addiction, is based on pragyaprad, mistake of the intellect, about the nature of the universe. This idea that we have, this mistaken idea we have, that there's some kind of essence that lies outside ourselves, which is going to provide our fulfillment. And this is borne out in legends we've seen of the Holy Grail, the Fountain of Youth, finding our soulmate that people talk about, things that people experience every day, the search for if I just get the right job, if I just get enough money, if I just find the perfect house environment to live in and got away from this horrible environment that I'm in, if I just found the right relationship, the right activity, the right substance even to help me feel happier. Very naturally, we tend to look outside ourselves, and with this belief that if we just look hard enough, we'll find something that will create our fulfillment. And the difficulty is that without removing this assumption, an addiction will continue to be fueled by this search for something. Even if we overcome one addiction, if we've still not got fulfillment as an inner experience, and we continue to look with this belief outside of ourselves for fulfillment, one addiction will just transfer into another addiction, and another. We'll get rid of one and it will turn into something else. And this is why, different phases of life, now we're looking for the right relationship. Oh, now if I just get the right job, now if just get this, I'll just get that. And then at some point we'll get to the thing which will make us happy. The reality is that, as I referred to there, the fulfillment is within you. The Vedic tradition says you are that fulfillment. You are it. It talks about the nature of the mind being Satchitananda, eternal bliss consciousness. Again, these are Sanskrit terms, Satchitananda, meaning eternal bliss consciousness. As I said, it explains that all cravings or addictions are just misguided expressions of this fundamental desire for the experience of our own blissful nature. And the solution to this, the Vedic tradition, is to go within, to know the self with a capital S, as I referred to at the beginning there, the self or the soul, to experience this universal level of consciousness, which is one's own essential being. It's which is a state of pure happiness, as says Satchitananda. And with that inner experience of real fulfillment coming from inside. And this is the only place where fulfillment is real and permanent. So all these external situations which we look to for happiness and fulfillment are constantly changing. We can't, we're not going to get a lasting happiness from those experiences. And the same with any kind of addiction. Now, of course, there are many, many different types of addiction, and alcohol included. So, so from this perspective, it's only the direct experience of the fulfillment of the self that's going to change those misguided assumptions that there's something out there that's going to fulfill us. And it's only that experience, direct experience of fulfillment of the self, that's going to stop the addiction. So any experience which gives us direct access to that inner experience, I am, the I that's the witness to everything, is the answer. The big self, the capital S, beyond our individuality, the unified field, or God, if we want to use that word, or a higher power. What may be useful for me to give you is a story actually from the Upanishads. Some of the Vedic knowledge has been written down in different forms over the thousands of years. And one series of knowledge is in the forms of stories, which are called the Upanishads. You may have come across that before. And one of the stories in the Upanishads is about a thirsty man in a lake. So there's a yogi. The story goes, there's a yogi walking through the forest, living a recluse life. A yogi meaning a man that's experiencing full integration of life. He's walking through the forest, making his way to this beautiful lake reservoir of pure, crystal clear, sweet drinking water. And he finds this lake, but to his surprise, in this lake, he comes across a man. There's a man at the side of the lake. It's a great big lake. But he's at the side of the lake, gripping onto the side for dear life. And he's got his chin resting on the edge of the lake. And he's licking the blades of grass, which have dew on them. And so the yogi's very curious. He comes across this man and says, what on earth are you doing? And the man says, I'm thirsty. I'm extremely thirsty. And by stopping me and asking me these questions, you're getting in the way of me getting what I need from these drops of dew on the grass. And he's frantically licking off these drops of dew from the grass in order to quench his thirst. And he gets very cross with the yogi for disturbing him, and you're wasting my time. This dew is going to evaporate at some point. I've got to get this dew off this grass to quench my thirst. And the yogi says, but look, don't you realize you're actually immersed in a deep lake full of pure, sweet drinking water. And all you need to do is to just let go of the side and allow yourself to slip beneath the water, and you have all the drinking water you need to quench your thirst. And that, of course, is a story to explain what I've just been saying there, that we are that fulfillment, that Satchitananda, but we don't realize it. So all the time we're licking the blades of grass, we're searching outside for something which is going to fulfill us. Meanwhile, not realizing that we are that fulfillment, and it's an inner experience. The real experience is an inner experience, and we just have to let go and experience that. And we'll say how a bit later on. That's an overview of the Vedic worldview of addiction. I'll just pass over to Colin for a moment. Colin, do you want to just say a bit more about that?
Okay, so there's a symbol that you may have seen if you've looked at any books on meditation, on the heart of yoga, as Transcendental Meditation is known. But there's nothing Gemma mentioned, the tendency to, I'm sorry I'm having to hold up cards here, but it was going to be on, whatever it's called, WhatsApp? No, the other thing. And we didn't quite get it going. So if you can read these, I hope you can. Action, impression, desire. Back to action, impression, desire. This is the cycle of our lives. We go out into activity, looking for something to fulfill us. We get impressions from our environment, and those produce a desire in us for more and more. And again, this is what Gemma was talking about just now, that we then return to going into action and finding more and more. We're constantly going into activity and hoping that in activity, on the surface level of life, we can find fulfillment. This is how it was presented originally, just those 3 arrows and 3 words. But there's a lot more to it than that. We can add these well-known, or this particular well-known idea, stress, physiological imbalance. Stress is a physiological imbalance, and that is what's created when, through our environment, we set off the fight or flight response, which is our recovery mode to try and, which is our what happens when we try to deal with challenge in life. That comes in 2 forms: the physiological stress, I've indicated with a red arrow there, and the green arrow, mental, the mental experience, the memory. Memory and stress are not the same thing. The physical stress is just that. It's a physiological imbalance. The memory is quite different. And a lot of people have said, I can't get over this, this terrible experience I've had of somebody dying that I love and all this. And once they start meditating, they find that we start dissolving this, and we'll talk about this in a minute. We dissolve this process. This is a never-ending circle or cycle, because the desire without it is turning into addiction. Yeah, that's the one. There's an intermediate stage, which is the yogis use, of being attachment to things, and then eventually it turns into addiction. And that's a constantly revolving cycle. What we add then, as Gemma was been saying about adding another dimension to this, we add in the process of transcendence. From the position of addiction and desire, we transcend with our meditation, come back into the cycle, and we come back into the cycle in this process of transcendence when we touch the bliss that's inside us, that is us, the Satchitananda. When we touch that level of the mind, that automatically starts to dissolve this cycle. And we find that it's going that way. We find that the degree of stress that's coming with the memory, the mental memory, is getting less and less. And many people have said, we live in an area where there's lots of retired people, and a lot of ladies who've lost their husbands, particularly that way round, sometimes the other way round, of course. And many of them have said to me, it's after meditating, they find that the pain of the loss is dissolving, while the experience of memory, it is coming sharper. They remember more things about their life with that person, all the bad things, the so-called bad things, as well as the good things, and they're all there, but they've lost their power. It's the stress that gives power to those experiences, those mental experiences, those mental habits that we've got of mourning and continuing to mourn and mourn and mourn and mourn and regret and regret and regret. It dissolves that, and we come from a much higher place. It's not that it eliminates the hurt. It doesn't eliminate the process. It eliminates the hurt, and so we start enjoying life as we should do, in happiness. And this is the process of transcendence. It's the most wonderful thing. The mind on the surface is completely it's like an ocean on the surface of a wave on the Earth's surface of an ocean. Absolute chaos. I mean, perhaps I should leave Gemma to talk about this now. If you want to go.
Good. So so as Colin was saying, so I'll just continue where Colin left off. So he was talking about stress there, stress in the nervous system. It's stress or impressions in the nervous system which is getting in the way of our ability, or is limiting our ability to have access to that fulfillment, that Satchitananda, the natural state that we would be in if it wasn't for the stressed nervous system. And we could think of it as like the body is like our teacher Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who brought the technique that we teach from this Vedic tradition to the West. He talked about using the analogy of the body being like a reflector. He said the body is a reflector of consciousness, and he used the analogy of a glass of murky water. And if you have a glass of murky water, you can have the sunshine shining down on that murky water, but you're not going to get much of a reflection of it. As you start to purify the water, you start to get a clearer reflection. It's not that the sunshine had disappeared. The sunshine was always there, but if what it's reflecting off is murky, you're going to get a murky reflection. So it's like this with our nervous systems. When our nervous systems are stressed, we're going to get a murky reflection of our natural state of consciousness. So we'll say a bit about stress in a moment. Well, yeah, it might be pertinent actually to talk about stress at this point in time, because Colin touched on it there. He talked about stress being impressions in the nervous system. So what is this stress that's getting in the way? People often think of stress as an event that happens to them. So people will say stress is this situation I've got going on in my life. Stress is these difficulties in these relationships. Stress is in the workplace. Stress is all these problems I'm having. Just to point out that stress isn't in the environment. Stress isn't something that happens to you, because if you think about it, if stress was something in the environment that happened to you, we would all respond to the same situation exactly the same way. But of course we don't. Two people go through exactly the same situation and respond very differently. One person doesn't faze them. Another person loses sleep and feels anxious about it. And we also know that the very same person can go through the same situation at a different point in time, even on the same day, and have a very different response. It depends on our level of resilience. Lots of psychologists talk about resilience levels these days. When we're feeling less resilient, if we wake up in the morning and if we wake up in the morning and feel nice and refreshed and we've been having a good week and things are going well, we're looking forward to the day, and we walk downstairs, we open the cupboard door and a glass falls out of the cupboard, smashes on the floor, and we say, oh dear, never mind, and we sweep it up and we get on with our day. If later that day some difficulties happen at work, some problems come up, maybe we even lose our job, or we get stuck in a traffic jam on the way to work, on the way back from work, or someone in the workplace is mean to us and something goes wrong, and we get home, we're exhausted, and we open the cupboard door and a glass smashes on the floor, it may be the final straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you like, and we have a meltdown, we can't cope with it. So stress isn't something that happens to us. Stress can result from a situation. So it can act as a trigger, but it depends on our perception of the situation, our level of resilience, and ultimately how much stress is already in the physiology. So you know about how the body gets stressed. I think most people know a bit about the fight-flight response, the body getting stressed. I'll just do a very quick recap of that, because it goes on to explain how stress starts to accumulate in the physiology to get in the way of this ability to have access to this fulfillment. So fight-flight response, you'll know how we have two aspects to the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what is activated when we're under threat. So our ancestors, thousands of years ago, when they were out foraging for food, were at the mercy of the environment, and they may have had a lion, tiger or bear creep up on them and go to attack them. Now, of course, our physiologies have been designed so that we have the ability to most effectively pull all our resources together in the physiology to allow us to either fight or to run away from the situation. And this has enabled our survival. This is how we're here now. Our ancestors survived because of this fight-flight response. So when they were faced with a lion, tiger or bear, the body would gear up to fight or flee. So the muscles would tense, the blood flow would go into the peripheries and into the limbs, we could run faster, the heart rate would increase, fats and sugars would release into the blood to create energy. Systems in the body that weren't needed at that particular point in time would temporarily shut down. So digestive system, you don't need to digest your food at that point. You just need to put your energy into where it's needed. Immune system, the immune system shuts down because we don't want to waste energy fighting a cough or cold when we're fighting for our lives. reproductive system, any system in the body that isn't essential at that point in time will temporarily shut down. What else? The blood becomes more acidic, so that if the tiger was to bite you, you wouldn't taste so nice and he'd let you go. Coagulants would start to clot the blood, so that again, if you were bitten, you wouldn't bleed to death. Your blood would be able to clot and you'd be more likely to survive. There'd be changes in the brain. The blood flow would go away from the executive functions of the brain, which is where we make our decisions. We don't want to sit and make a decision what to do next. The blood flow goes to the amygdala, the emotion center of the brain. So we're on active, heightened alert, geared up to fight or flee, ready to avert that danger. And of course, there's adrenaline, cortisol. We know about the stress hormones that are pumped into the bloodstream. So in other words, the physiology temporarily goes out of homeostatic balance. It's geared up to fight or flee. Now, that's a good response to have. We still need that response to this day. Our threats are less environmental. We've not got so many lions, tigers and bears chasing after us, but we have got more psychological threats. Threats to our identity, threats of pressures and deadlines, but also just stimulus. The pace of life has speeded up. We're bombarded with information, and do. And the more technology we've had to help us do these things faster, we start to do things faster, but try to cram more in. There's so much stimulus going on. And not just things that are negative, no, exciting things, winning the lottery, falling in love, watching a scary film, going on a roller coaster. All these things stimulate the physiology and create that fight-flight response. Watching adverts on the TV, all the information that our ancestors weren't exposed to, of all the troubles that are going on in the whole world, we get bombarded with on the newsreels, on the radio, on the TV. So the physiology can become overactive. The sympathetic nervous system becomes overactive, and it's overstimulated. It doesn't settle back down. The physiology can potentially remain out of homeostatic balance. What should happen is we face a threat or challenge or danger. Our ancestors would do that. And you see in the animal kingdom, cats, you look at your domestic cats now, and you can see they will stalk their prey or fight their predator. And so the body will go into fight, flight. And then what would happen after that? Once the situation is finished, the parasympathetic nervous system would kick in. This is the rest and recovery mode. So the cat would lie down, have a stretch, yawn, and have a wash, and the body would come back into homeostatic balance. And I've heard it said recently, they reckon that our ancestors were in the sympathetic nervous system state, just perhaps, I don't know what they said, 2%, maybe 5% of the time maximum. And the majority of the time, we were operating from our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and recovery state. And these days, in some cases, we could even say that's been reversed, that all too often we're remaining in that fight-flight mode, the sympathetic nervous system state, and we're not resting and recovering, which means stress starts to leave an impression in the physiology. The physiology doesn't return back to homeostatic balance. It remains out of balance in some way. So I'll give you a few examples of what happens just on the things we talked about there, the fight-flight response. So if the heart rate remains elevated, we start to get high blood pressure. If the fats and sugars continue to clot the blood, and coagulants start to clot the blood, can lead to heart attack and stroke. Continue to clot the blood, can lead to heart attack and stroke. If the digestive system doesn't return to proper functioning, get all sorts of digestive issues, IBS, and all sorts of digestive problems. And Ayurveda, which is the twin body of knowledge with yoga, talks about the importance of digestion, which it's really central to health, has a knock-on effect of the whole of our health. If our what else do we talk about there? The immune system, if the immune system stays shut down, doesn't come back to full functioning, we're at the mercy of all sorts of diseases and things like this. What else? The brain. If the blood flow continues to go to the amygdala rather than the executive functions, we find we can't think so clearly. We lose our ability to concentrate or be able to focus. So many people complain of brain fog these days. And the blood flow is going to the amygdala, the emotion center of the brain. So an active, heightened alert, on the lookout for danger, being hypervigilant and starting to feel anxious. And all of these things and the adrenaline, the cortisol, all have an effect on our mental health. So these things affect our ability to sleep well. Our ability to sleep well affects our levels of fatigue, which affects our susceptibility to respond to situations effectively. So more stress accumulates. The stress starts accumulating in the physiology. What we're talking about with stress is an impression left in the physiology, not something that happens to us, not a temporary state that we get into. The body was designed to get stressed in a moment, in that point of moment in time. It wasn't designed to stay stressed. When the body stays stressed, this is where we're at the mercy of all sorts of mental and physical health problems. And of course, addiction. When we start to feel unhealthy, unhappy, anxious, depressed, and suffering the effects of trauma, because the words stress and trauma can be used interchangeably. The biggest experts in the field of trauma now in modern psychology will talk about how stress and trauma is held in the body. So this all has an impact on the physiology. It's held at a cellular level. It creates a cellular distortion in the physiology. So this affects our mental health, our physical health, and including our tendency to be drawn to things that we look for to help us feel better, including alcohol or other things that so many people are addicted to in our society. Most people are addicted to something. So what's the answer according to the Vedic worldview? As well, Colin started to talk there about transcendence, how transcendence breaks that cycle of stress, the action, the impression, and the desire that's created as a result. And the breaking the cycles with transcendence. Transcendence is the settled mind. Transcending is the process of the mind settling into silence through meditation. Now, you'll be aware from the introduction that what we teach is called Transcendental Meditation from the Vedic tradition. And what's important here actually to clarify as well is that the word meditation is a very generic word. There's lots of different types of meditation, and it may just be useful to give a bit of an overview as to the type of meditation that we're talking about here and how it relates to other techniques of meditation. So there's lots of different things out there, and many of you will have tried and probably have a long-term practice of different types of meditation. So Colin started to mention there an analogy for the mind, and this analogy for the mind can help explain these different types of meditation as well. So this analogy for the mind, he said that the mind is like an ocean. If you think of an ocean, if you're standing looking out to sea, you stood on a cliff looking out to sea, if there was a storm going on and lots of crazy weather going on, the ocean would be very rough. And you'd quite rightly say, well, the ocean is very rough today. But the reality is you're only saying what you can see on the surface. The full reality, the full picture is if you actually went out onto that ocean, got in your boat and went out onto the ocean and took a dive over the side, you would find that what's on the surface didn't necessarily reflect the whole picture. As you dive down, you would find that the ocean became more and more settled until you finally reached a silent bed of the ocean. So all our minds have a silent depth. It's the analogy for our minds. Our minds may be very active on the surface, yet all our minds have a silent depth. Now, I'll just use that analogy to explain a few different types of meditation. So a useful piece of research to quote, actually, and you can look this up if you want to, you'll be able to find it online. A couple of researchers called Travis and Shear in 2010, you can easily find this article if you want to, looked at all the research that had been done on different types of meditation and looked at the process that was described, the outcome that was shown, the effects in the brain. And they came up with three main categories of meditation. The first category of meditation that they identified was focused attention. So focused attention meditation, so these three categories differ in the level of control that's involved in the process. So focused attention, the first category that they identified is a category which involves the most concentration or control. It includes any technique which involves a concentration or control, such as Qigong, Zen meditation often comes into this category. Vipassana sometimes comes into this category too. It's a bit like focused attention is using something to focus the mind on in order to regain control of the mind. It's like being in a boat, using that ocean analogy, getting into your boat, being on the surface of the ocean with all the activity of the ocean on the surface and trying to keep the boat steady, trying to force the mind, force the boat to be steady amongst all the turbulence of the ocean. Which is quite difficult to do. And those of you that have practiced concentration techniques may relate to this, that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to control the mind. And this is why so many people, when I say I'm a meditation teacher, so many people will say, oh, I've tried to meditate, I couldn't do it, it's very difficult, I couldn't control my mind, I've got a monkey mind, my mind is like monkeys leaping around in trees. You may have heard this analogy before, that people use. This is an analogy that came out of India to describe this activity of the mind. The mind is like monkeys leaping around in the trees, jumping around from branch to branch. So the idea with concentration techniques is that we need to catch the monkeys, tie them down, keep them still. In other words, it's no good the mind being off in the past, off in the future. We need to regain control over the mind, not let it have control over our emotions, our behaviours. So it involves some good degree of concentration or control, and this is shown in the brainwave activity. People that were wired up to an EEG machine when they're practicing these focused attention techniques show gamma frequency activity on the EEG machine. So lots of peaks and troughs on the graph, which is the same EEG effect you would see if someone was calculating a complex maths task. They were focusing and trying to calculate this sum. So you see that effect. So that's the first category. The second category that was identified was open monitoring. Now, open monitoring includes mindfulness that probably most, if not all of you, have at least dabbled with and perhaps even have a long-term practice of. Lots of people are practicing that these days because there's lots of apps and things that you can use to practice mindfulness techniques, probably at the end of yoga classes as well. So mindfulness techniques involve coming to this category of open monitoring because we're monitoring the content of our awareness. There's less concentration or control than the focused attention techniques, but there's still some degree of control. It's still a mind training. It's like a gentle ushering. It's like being a shepherd of your thoughts, ushering our attention back to present moment awareness, using something like the breath, the body, an object, an activity, something to return the attention to encourage the mind to be present, not off in the past, off in the future. So the mind wanders off, we gently bring it back, mind wanders off, we gently bring it back. And using that ocean analogy, it's a bit like being in your boat and trying to keep the boat steady. So the focused attention techniques is like trying to keep the ocean steady. The open monitoring is like trying to keep the boat steady. So some degree of control we can have, trying to keep steady within the boat, if you like. So some degree of control involved. The third category of meditation, so I'll go to that question in a moment. I saw somebody had their hand up. The third category of meditation that they identified in this piece of research was automatic self-transcending. Now, transcendental meditation was virtually unique in this category of automatic self-transcending. This is it's called automatic self-transcending because you transcend or go beyond the actual technique itself. You lose the technique, you lose the mantra. The technique in TM is a mantra or sound, which acts as a vehicle for transcending. So you actually lose the mantra in the process. That's why it's called automatic self-transcending. And in terms of that ocean analogy, it's a bit like being in your boat and taking a dive over the side. So the boat is bobbing around, being tossed around on the surface of the ocean with all that activity going on, and we take a dive over the side. We transcend or go beyond that thought-filled level of the mind, transcend. We allow the mind to settle into silence. So this technique involves least effort, even no effort. There's no concentration or control involved in this third category of meditation. Very effortless process. And what you see in the brain in the brainwave research for this technique is an alpha wave activity permeating the whole brain. Alpha wave activity indicates a relaxed mental state, a quietness in the core of the brain, increased blood flow to the front of the brain, increased oxygen permeating the whole brain, and also importantly, an EEG coherence, an orderliness of the brain, orderliness between left and right hemispheres, frontal and occipital lobes, which in fact is not seen in ordinary waking, dreaming, sleeping states of consciousness. It's been identified as a distinct physiological state separate to waking, dreaming, sleeping, as indicated by that brainwave activity. It's a fourth state of consciousness called transcendental consciousness. So back to this point of actually just also to say there that in case you're wondering, how does transcendence then relate to mindfulness? Well, regular transcendence, one automatic effect of regular transcendence is increased mindfulness. If our aim is to be more present, more in the present moment, less off in the past, less off in the future, this happens as an automatic effect of regular transcendental meditation, because as we transcend, we actually release stress, and it's the stress and the physiology which has been holding us on the surface, the mind flitting around from thing to thing. So increased mindfulness is an automatic result. So just going back to this point of effort, and how many people say, oh yeah, I've tried to meditate, I couldn't control my mind, I found it very difficult. What people find with TM is that transcendental meditation is very easy, very effortless, because of what we were saying at the beginning, that the nature of the mind is Satchitananda. What is the mind always seeking? The mind is always seeking happiness. Everything we do in life, absolutely everything that you do, if you analyze everything that you do in life, it comes back to, if you think and analyze, everything comes back to the mind's search for happiness. And we're searching out there. That's why we find we get addicted to substances such as alcohol. We're seeking that happiness. And what we don't realize is it's a natural internal state. And as we start to transcend in meditation, the mind gets drawn in that direction. TM, the process of transcendental meditation involves using a mantra or sound, not chanted out loud, not even chanted internally. Thought is a thought. It's a silent mental repetition, very effortless though, not concentrating or controlling or trying to keep the mantra there. It's not mantra japa, which is known as constant focused repetition. That's how it's become to be known in the West. It doesn't involve concentration or control. It involves innocently thinking a mantra. The mantra has particular qualities which make it effective for transcending or allowing the mind to settle into silence. So when you get taught the technique of TM, you receive a particular mantra or sound which is particularly resonant with your physiology. So there are lots of different mantras. We have a selection of mantras, and some are more suitable for some people than others. So you receive a mantra which is suitable for you, the instruction on how to use it properly, and that's very, very effortless. We start to find, as we begin to think the mantra, the mind gets drawn. Now, as the mind starts to settle down, and each degree of settling, the mind is getting more and more drawn in the direction of that inner experience of fulfillment or bliss, Satchitananda. The mind, trying to force the mind to transcend or settle into silence is like trying to push a river downstream. A stream is naturally flowing down into the river and towards the ocean. You don't have to push it there. And it's very natural for the mind to transcend or settle into silence. It's a natural state. And the mind, given the opportunity, will naturally go in that direction. It's a very natural, spontaneous process. But what we find is, as the mind starts to settle down and transcend, the state of the body means that the mind cannot sustain an experience of transcendence, a settled mind, the silent, unbounded, unchanging level of the mind, that blissful state. The mind cannot sustain that when the body is stressed, because when the mind starts to settle down, the body starts to settle down in response, because you all know how the mind and body are intimately connected. I'm sure everybody here knows about the intimacy of the mind-body connection, how one affects the other, and you can't get one doing one thing and the other not responding. The mind will always affect the body will always affect the mind, which is why I went in TM, when the mind settles down, body can't help but settle down in response. When the body settles right down, we get a particularly deep level of rest. The earliest research on TM was physiological research, which showed how the body goes into a restructuring state. You get a particularly profound, deep level of rest, as measured by heart rate, oxygen consumption, galvanic skin response. These are physiological measures which show the metabolic rate is slowing right down. The body's getting a very deep level of rest. And that deep level of rest is the antidote to the stress that's being held in the physiology that we were describing earlier. In the face of that deep breath, the body can't help but start to release these impressions, these stored impressions, stresses or traumas held at deep cell level in the body. The body starts to let go of that. What we're doing is wakening up the body's natural ability to self-heal. As those stresses release, the physiology starts to come back into balance, including the normalization of the chemical state in the brain. No, we find the research shows less stress hormones and more of those bliss chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, all those things. And the effects has an effect on every aspect of life. Our mental health starts to improve, our physical health, because as we said, that stress, the stress held in the physiology and the fatigue that accumulates with that was the cause of, the root cause of all those issues experienced physically and mentally. So as that stress starts to release, the whole physiology comes back into balance, mental and physical health improve, including our tendency to be drawn to something to make us feel happy as an external experience. We start to find that we no longer need, gradually over time, less and less, we need these external experiences, including substances, including alcohol. We start to need them less. There's a spontaneous, gradual process over time of the body of us needing or searching for that fulfillment, that bliss, that happiness outside, or even, you could even frame it as something to alleviate our suffering, if you like. Even if we don't think of it as looking there for bliss, we may not be searching there for bliss, but even just a alleviation of our suffering. And of course, as we start to experience that fulfillment from inside, and we have less stress, less anxiety, less depression, less of these difficulties, and start to find that we're able to cope with the ups and downs of life more easily. As our perception changes, we don't see things, because remember, those challenges in the environment are challenges. They're not containing the stress. We start to be able to deal with those challenges more easily. The body gets less stressed, therefore stays less stressed. And when it does go into that stress state, it releases that stress more quickly the more we meditate. And we don't need those external supports as much. So gradually over time, we start to find there's a tendency for people to let go of things that they've been dependent on, which have not been serving them, including alcohol. And some of the research shows this. There's been loads and loads of research on TM, some of it specifically on addiction. And of course, research varies in terms of how, some research is better than others. But there was a meta-analysis of 198 studies, including 19 on TM, that found that TM produced marked, sustained, and highly significant reductions in smoking, alcohol consumption, illicit drug use, with effect sizes nearly twice as large as other treatments, including standard therapies, other forms of meditation, relaxation, training, educational programs, anxiety management, counselling, all those stuff. However, I will add that, in terms of serious addiction, that we do advocate doing other things alongside. But TM is a really powerful foundation, or transcendence, should I say, is a really powerful foundation. It's regular transcending, coming to the surface, transcending, coming to the surface, helping the body come back into balance, releasing that stress, and improving our mental, physical health, and starting to experience that inner bliss. Life gets easier, life gets happier and more fulfilling. And we start to find that these outer experiences start to pale in comparison to the inner experience that we start to have. And, but yes, TM is a really powerful foundation for that. It will support everything else that you do, whether that's counselling or other therapeutic approaches, which are often necessary in the case of some serious addiction.